we are back again in Revelation and Revelation 13, and I've been looking forward to this chapter, I guess, with a small measure of dread and excitement, and, well, here we go. In the early 19th century, the English poet William Blake began a series of paintings visualising these hideous beings which are so graphically depicted for us in Revelation 12 and 13. I think it's almost unimaginable in the Western world today that such a major artistic undertaking might even be considered worthwhile. And we'll come back to that in just a moment. So with all of his artistic prowess as part of a much bigger project to paint over 100 paintings to illustrate various books of the Bible, Blake clearly applied himself to capturing the rich details that John the Apostle gives us here in this late first century vision of the hidden drama behind human history. Chapters 12, 13 and 14 show us the mighty confrontation of powers in the spiritual realm, and I'll show you some of those paintings shortly. I do want to ask, why is it that such a project in our world today would be scoffed at? Why would our society scoff at such an artistic project? Because sure, we still long for glory and for beings who are worthy of worship. But in our society today, the attitude is surely those beings don't need to come from the Bible, do they? Surely we can find other beings worthy of our worship and maybe less demanding, especially less demanding than Christ, the King of Kings. Can't we worship, popular influencers or Olympic heroes or maybe scientific gurus or poets or political leaders or ideologies, or some people even worship their own grandchildren? Isn't our technological age the pinnacle of history so far? And aren't we ourselves the pinnacle of creation? And if we find other such heroes who we can worship, aren't they just higher, faster, stronger versions of what I might have been? And as a society, what we do is we very happily and quickly shift our gaze away from the Lamb once slain. We shift our gaze away from the Lamb once slain, and in the process, we are immediately deceived and carried into all different kinds of false worship. What John shows us, though, in chapters 12, 13 and 14 of Revelation is there's a whole lot more going on even than just that. There's a hidden drama behind human history. It is a mighty confrontation of spiritual powers, and the truth is there is a monstrous, I'm calling it a triumvirate of deception. You could call it a false trinity. There is a monstrous false trinity aiming to steal our allegiance and to seize our souls in the desperate attempt to thwart God's plan in the short time available. I said last time, chapters 12, 13 and 14 form, it's like the fulcrum right at the heart of Revelation. Where have we come so far in Revelation? We kicked off way back in the beginning. We joined John goggling at his vision, a majestic vision of the risen and reigning Son of Man. We then carefully digested his 7-part message to his earthly churches. Don't compromise. Whatever you do, don't compromise. In chapters 4 and 5, we're then ushered into the very throne room of heaven. The wonderful thing is heaven's throne is not vacant, and the Lion, who is also a lamb, is fully worthy of our worship. From there, we then again and again and again, kind of like in a big cycle, we kept looking at this gigantic span of history from Jesus' ascension until the judgment, from different angles, looking at different facets of that gigantic span of history. First, there were the 7 seals being opened, and the whole point of that was keep persevering amid tribulation. Keep persevering. Then there was the sounding of 7 fearful trumpets. Be warned, O world, and repent. Be faithful, O church, and testify. And then chapter 12. Arriving in chapter 12, I said last time, at last we're ready for limited exposure to the hidden drama in the spiritual realm behind human history. And we were introduced to the dragon. Here's the first of Blake's paintings. I think it's a fabulous painting. Just absorb some of the details in there. And I said last time, in part, why is this chapter here? Don't be naive. Don't be naive. Whether we like it or not, whether we acknowledge it or not, we face serious enemies. You face serious enemies. Led by the great accuser, Satan, the arch-deceiver himself. He is the prince of this dark world. He holds so much of our world in covert bondage, and he prowls around looking for people to devour. In chapter 12, he's depicted as a monstrous, multi-headed, crown-hungry dragon. And you might say he's like the 4-star general, directing all the powers of evil. At the end of chapter 12, we're told he is enraged because his finest tactics against the heaven-sent Messiah have all failed, and he knows his time is short. Jesus the Messiah, with his angelic forces, has won the most crucial of victories, and so the end of the War of the Ages is now certain. All that remains for this dragon is to thwart the plan of God in the time available. And here's Blake's painting of the end of chapter, it's kind of a different angle, of the end of chapter 12. Here's the dragon waging war against God's faithful people, the woman, and her other offspring, wherever he can find them in the world. That's what he is trying to do, waging war. But now, as we turn into chapter 13, the question is, how does this deceiving dragon do his work? And we're introduced to 2 creatures, 2 beings. The first one, I imagine, is like the 3-star lieutenant general working under the 4-star general. He's a beastly antichrist figure. And we're going to reread in just a moment. The sea through Revelation represents the realm of evil. Horns represent power. Crowns represent conquest. As you imagine a creature emerging from the sea, if you know your Roman history, you might imagine a menacing naval flotilla appearing on the horizon and begin to take a breath. Here comes trouble. Though it's worse than that, if you know your Old Testament prophets, this beast appears to be like a strange mashup of the 4 beasts in Daniel 7, each of which represents an earthly empire. Let's read. The dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. Here's Blake's next painting. I'll leave that up for a while. I saw a beast coming out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 7 heads, and 10 crowns on his horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. This first beast is a wondrous, grotesque imitation of the dragon. And so far as I can see, this first beast is a composite of all earthly empires, human earthly empires that stand opposed to God and his people. Notice the death wound to one of his heads, temporarily healed. It's like a takeoff. It's a parody of the victorious lamb once slain. It's like this beast has experienced a counterfeit resurrection. Though the counterfeit resurrection is not intended to redeem anyone, it's intended to deceive. He's given real power, though it's temporary power. And now, the wonder of the nations turns into foul worship. Verse 3 again. The whole world was astonished and followed the beast. Men worshipped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshipped the beast and asked, "Who is like the beast? Who can make war against him?" Now, actually, this is a tragedy because is either the dragon or his 3-star lieutenant general good enough or worthy enough or regal enough to be worshipped? Not at all. Even this worship is a parody of the worship that is due to God alone. As I was reading this, one of the verses that came to mind comes from the middle of the Song of Moses. Who among the gods is like you, Lord? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, working wonders? As Moses sings, he says, God, you are the incomparable one. But now this is what the nations sing to the beast. Who is like you? In verses 5 and 6, we're told that this beast utters proud blasphemies. Do you know, in John's own day, the Roman Emperor Domitian required people to address him as our Lord and God. It's a vicious blasphemy. He's claiming to be God. So no doubt John's first readers would have recognised in this depiction of the beast, this is the spirit of Rome. This is the spirit of an earthly empire that sets itself up against Christ. In verse 7, the beast brutally tramples all over God's people. You glimpse this most vividly today in places like Afghanistan or Libya or northern Nigeria, anywhere where faithful church communities are rudely squashed or politely steamrolled. Notice, though, all this is only for 42 months. Verse 5, that number again. What's 42 months? Or elsewhere in Revelation, 1,260 days at 30 days per month. All the way through Revelation, numbers are symbolic. The number, I think, the number to have in mind is 7 is the number of completeness or of perfection. 7 is the number of completeness or perfection. 42 months is 3.5 years, which is half of 7. And 42 months is a way of saying from the ascension until the judgment, it's just a fraction of the complete plan of God. Yes, it feels like us to a long time, but it's just 42 months. It's not forever. Satan would never choose such limits. Satan would prefer this to go on and on forever. But no, he's only going to have 42 months. from ascension until judgment. So this 3-star beast is Satan's vicegerent of evil, a grim figure that John elsewhere in his letters labels the Antichrist. Who does this represent? Earthly empires, human empires that are determined to do away with God. And so, as you think through millennia of human history, you say, well, this beast already has come time and time and time again in every empire that stands against God. Think about our world today. Can you name an earthly power seeking to delude the whole world into worshipping and following it rather than Christ? Can you name a power like that? I think there's lots of them. And at least in Western society, I think the biggest one, the strongest one, I would label as materialistic, individualistic, militant secularism. Materialistic, individualistic, militant secularism. This power seems so invincible and makes such proud claims. It's the kind of thing that we hear one way or another all the time. Oh, God is dead. We don't need God anymore. We've moved on, haven't we? What possible need is there for a saviour who offers anything that we can't achieve ourselves? Aren't we the captains of our own souls now? The most important person in the world is you, isn't it? Isn't our technological age the pinnacle of history so far? Who's more worthy of worship than you? This is the call of materialistic, individualistic, militant secularism. I remember some years ago, I was trying to remember, when was this? I think maybe 2013. I was sitting waiting in an airport lounge. At the time, this airport lounge was not very far away from Silicon Valley. And just across the way in the airport lounge, I overheard this kind of brash, know-it-all Californian nerd who was spouting the wonders of working for Google, whose high-tech glasses he was wearing at that moment. And very clearly, he wanted to impress upon anyone who might listen. He just kind of gathered an audience in the airport lounge. His underlying message was, don't worry, we've got the future all wrapped up. We've got everything under control. So get on board with us and you'll be on the right side of history. That's the spirit of the beast, right there. That's the spirit of materialistic, individualistic, militant secularism right there. Now, it's possible that there will be one day a single final aggressor against God, but I don't think we can say this chapter is only about what is yet to come. It's about the world we live in now. This beast is here. What does the beast say? We've got the future all wrapped up. Get on board with us. You'll be on the right side of history. But you know it's not true. In verse 8, we're told that the Lamb once slain has a precious, precious book of life in which are recorded the names of all those people foreknown by God and called by God from the foundation of the cosmos. Verse 8, all inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the book of life belonging to the Lamb that was slain from the creation of the world. He who has an ear, let him hear. John tells us it is fully worth persevering through whatever vile evil this beast chooses to hurl our way. And you realise there's an awful, awful reality in verse 8. Yes, there are people whose names are written in the book of life, but everyone else is deceived. Everyone else, one way or another, worships this pretentious lieutenant general, this beast, this 3-star deputy to Satan. And there's no fence sitting. Every single person whom you have ever known either has their name written in the Lamb's Book of Life, or else they refuse to worship the Lamb and they are deceived into the kingdom of darkness. There is no fence sitting. There is no Switzerland. There's no neutral ground. And so that pushes me to ask the question, which is more fearful, to be temporarily trampled by this hideous lying beast or to be excluded from the Lamb's Book of Life? Now, the chapter, in a way, could end there, with a summons to faith-filled endurance in verse 10. But no, there's more. We're introduced now, I would say this is like the 2-star major general working down the military chain of command. If the first beast is militant and loud and proud and larger than life, this second one is more silver-tongued, persuasive, mesmerising. This is like the minister for propaganda. This second beast also, in his own way, is a direct parody of the Lamb once slain in verse 11. Here he is speaking deceptively, just like the dragon. As I was thinking about this, I remembered, some of us may remember from, this is almost 20 years ago now, Saddam Hussein's Minister for Information during the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Do you remember? It was the most comical, entertaining part of the entire invasion. If you don't know what I'm talking about, search up Baghdad Bob. He was the master of smooth-talking, barefaced lies, right up until the end. What was the line? It is they, talking about the invading forces, it's they who will surrender or else burn in their tanks. And they're a couple of 100 metres away from where he was giving his teleconference. That's what this second beast is like. Later on in Revelation, this second beast is labelled the false prophet. His one job in verse 14 is to deceive. In John's vision, it's kind of like a rerun of Nebuchadnezzar's great statue so long ago in Daniel 3 and the command to worship, or no doubt for John's original readers, they probably thought that they would have known about the great statue of Domitian, 7-metre high statue of the emperor in Ephesus, and the expectation that people would worship, except now this statue in verse 15 speaks. And huge pressure is applied. If you don't worship, if you won't worship, you will suffer. Perhaps you remember when we were in chapter 2 and looking at the messages from Jesus to the church communities in Pergamum and Thyatira. I commented then, especially Pergamum, the description in chapter 2 is that's where Satan has his throne. What was going on in those cities was, well, if you refuse to to join in emperor worship, watch out. There'll be consequences for your business. If you won't worship, what might happen to your business? So here's the final painting from William Blake. You can see in there the false prophet, in between the dragon in the background and the beast in the foreground. And the false prophet, with hands out like this, is persuading all the earth dwellers, who you can just see down at the bottom of the painting, to bow down in homage. And working together in this painting, we have the full false trinity that I'm calling the Triumvirate of Deception. Right now, in our world today, what's the false prophet's loudest lie? Answer, you hear things like this all the time. You do you. In fact, you define you. Don't let God define you. You define you. You choose how to express you. The only people in the wrong are those who refuse to celebrate your progress away from God. I would say in our world today, that's the false prophet's loudest lie. And in movie after movie and workplace after workplace and family after family, there is huge pressure to join in. Or else, so they say, to find yourself on the wrong side of history. But it's a delusion. It's like Baghdad Bob. In the Roman world, they would put a tattoo or a brand on the hand or forehead of their slaves as a mark of ownership and allegiance. We're told here that this false prophet puts a mark on all who do not belong to Christ. And the tattoo or the brand is the name or number of the beast in verses 16 and 17. Again, this is a parody of the seal of God which is placed upon every Christian. All who know Christ as Lord are sealed. That's back in chapter 7. And the sense here in chapter 13 is, if you don't have this mark of the beast, you will suffer. Your business will suffer. You had better conform, otherwise you're not going to belong in proper society. We're not going to let you buy, trade. No one gets excluded from having the mark of the beast except those who belong to Christ. And so we come to the number in verse 18, 666. This must be one of the most speculated upon details from the whole of Revelation, I reckon. Some people try to calculate, does this represent the name of one person in particular, like Caesar Nero, or people have gone, various modern politicians? Could this be the person that this represents? I remember as a boy, actually, the old bank card logo. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look it up. It looked a bit like a 666. Does this mean we shouldn't be using bank cards? But the thing is, in Revelation, numbers are symbolic. And the thing about 6 is, if 7 is the number of completeness, 6 is the number of incompleteness. If 7 is the number of perfection, then 6 is the number of imperfection. If 7 is the number of God, 6 is the number of humanity constantly falling short. And so 666, it's like a perfect trinity of imperfection. and incompleteness. It is the number of humanity constantly falling short, and of counterfeit salvation through a counterfeit Trinity. So I say, if Google tries to offer or pretends to offer what only Christ can offer, that's a 666 deal. If NASA tries to offer what only Christ can offer, glory, that's a 666 deal. If Hollywood or the Olympics or the AFL try to draw your worship, that's a 666 moment. If Moscow or the Macquarie Bank or Washington or Woolies or any other human institution demands your total loyalty, that's a big 666 alarm bell. There is a reason that in World War II, Dietrich Bonhoeffer famously realised that this false trinity was using the power of the state, and that he absolutely must resist Nazi rule. It's really interesting putting Romans 13 and Revelation 13 side by side. Romans 13 says the powers that be are put there by God. And Bonhoeffer knew that. But he also knew the powers that be are so easily twisted by Satan into agents of evil. Both are true. And so he not only resisted, he became part of the resistance. The powers that be can be twisted into agents of evil. How does that happen? This chapter shows us there is a false trinity, a triumvirate of deception, which aims to steal our allegiance and to seize our souls. That's the aim. But their time is short. So what are we to do? Fix your hearts on the Lamb. Fix your hearts on the Lamb once slain. This calls for endurance, verse 10, and wisdom, verse 18. Fix your heart on the Lamb. I'll finish this way. Every single time that I get to conduct a baptism, probably one of my favourite parts is when I get to say these words. Fight bravely under Christ's banner against sin, the world, and the devil. And it's no accident that Satan is included there with his subordinate powers who stand against us. What are the words in the baptism service? Fight bravely under his banner against sin, the world, and the devil, and continue Christ's faithful soldier and servant to your life's end.